Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today to our session, More Automation, Less Clicks. I'm delighted to be today with my colleague, Bas Rayman. He is Principal Architect at Nutanix. Hi, Bas. How's it going?
Hey, Jose. I'm doing good. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Looking forward for this session that we have here today. Could you tell us a bit more about you? What is your role here at Nutanix?
So, sure. I joined Nutanix just over 8 years ago as probably one of the first employees in Europe. Started off as an SE, but right now I am part of the engineering team. And I do a lot of things related to SAP. So officially I'm part of SAP engineering. My official title is Principal Solutions Architect. And that means that I make sure that SAP and the various products from SAP work as well as they can on the Nutanix platform.
Oh, that sounds like something very challenging because I guess that you need to validate many combinations of SAP, right?
Yes, we have a lot of partners. We have partners like HPE, Fujitsu. We have Dell and Lenovo. And all of these partners come by and we have to make sure that Nutanix works on those platforms, that SAP as a software solution works on those platforms in combination with Nutanix, which means that we have our work cut out for us. There's a lot of testing. If something doesn't work quite the way we like it, we have to redo a lot of things. We constantly have new requests coming in because obviously hardware changes, you have new technologies, new software versions. So that keeps us quite busy.
That sounds like it's a scenario for automation to make your life easier and less clicks, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. One of the main challenges when we started off with all of this was that we were so busy in that process itself. We would like to automate, but as you know, sometimes daily business, you're so occupied that you're so busy trying to fix the car because it can't break down that you don't actually fix the car. It was the same for us. We were just trying to keep up with more and more requests. So at a certain point, we said we need to automate more, which is what we did. We started using COM, our own solution internally, to solve a lot of those challenges. So both from a pure installation perspective for the SAP HANA database, for example, but also for our validation work, which we have to do time and time again, because obviously we want our customers to be supported on latest versions, on new platforms. So it's good to be able to leverage the tools that we have to make our lives, even inside of the engineering team, simpler. And we want to do the same thing for customers, obviously.
And this is the reason that we are here today, right? So how automation can help customers from the SUSE Linux standpoint, that is the part that I'm going to cover today on this session, and how to apply later on and evolving that into the SAP automation with Bas. Introduce myself, a technical marketing engineer at Nutanix. I'm Jose Gomez, has been in Nutanix for 3 years, and I cover everything related to automation orchestration here at Nutanix. As Bas mentioned, what we are going to cover today is our automation orchestration framework at Nutanix that it's called Calm. And we will show you how we have used Calm on the first part of this session for the automation of SUSE Linux, how we do the bootstrapping of a SUSE Linux from scratch, no VM template, nothing like that, just taking the image directly from SUSE website and then use that ISO image to create a VM template that later on I can hand over, in that case, to Bas, and he can use it on his automation process to deploy on top of that SUSE Linux, SAP HANA, right, Bas?
Exactly correct.
Great. So let's see how it looks like the first part of this session, that is the automation of SUSE Linux on Nutanix. Here we are in Nutanix Calm. This is the marketplace of Calm from where you can deploy your different services. Here you could have one of the items could be the deployment of SAP HANA, and you could deploy that on Nutanix on-prem or even in other locations, other clouds. But let's get first an overview about what you are going to see on this part of the demo. So I'm going to whiteboard for a second. What you are going to experience today on this part of the session is we are going to deploy, we have a blueprint. A blueprint is just a definition on code of what you want to automate. And that blueprint that we have, what it's going to do is that blueprint will deploy a repository. We are using Artifactory in this case. So this is just a repo. And in this repo, we are going to give a place to upload your SUSE Linux ISO. Once you get your ISO image uploaded, a second step of this blueprint is I want to patch that image. And what is happening? An ISO image from SUSE, it doesn't include Cloud Init out of the box. So you cannot fully automate the deployment of SUSE Linux. What we do with the ISO is we capture the ISO, we edit on fly the ISO, and we add a boot config where we say the AutoYast server is going to be this Artifactory server. So we just define on the boot config, we just point HTTP to the IP address of that repository. On that way, with that new ISO, is the ISO that you can mount on a empty virtual machine with no operating system. Even you could use that ISO to mount it on a physical server if you like. And what will happen is when you power on the virtual machine, when you create your new blueprint with a virtual machine, you will give there your CD-ROM that will point to that ISO that has been generated. And then you will have a hard drive empty, let's say 100 GB. When that VM boot will boot from the ISO from the CD-ROM, will start to load the binaries. And at some point, we'll request from the repo, from this Artifactory, give me all the binaries that I need to do the installation. Those binaries, as we can see here, Artifactory, they are available on this, and this is the URL that is part of that boot config. But you don't need to worry about that. The blueprint in Calm, it's going to do the deployment of Artifactory for you. You just need to worry about the ISO image, upload that image as you are going to see now on the demo. And once you have that image, we just deploy a virtual machine that is using that ISO. And at some point, the virtual machine provisioning will stop. And that is because AutoYast require a configuration. And this is what we will demonstrate as well. In this case, this is a default AutoYast configuration file where we are telling to SUSE, this is what you have to do. You need to format this drive with those partitions, you need to configure this network, and so on. The point here is we are using default, but imagine this at a scale. You could use the same approach and have multiple AutoYast files. You could have an AutoYast file that apply as a default, another one that apply for development, and another one that apply for production that will have different settings, maybe different partitions. But the process to deploy is exactly the same across all of them. Let me show you very quickly that blueprint. So we have a blueprint here. Let me find the blueprint that is specifically this one. And the blueprint, it's very simple. Here we have a virtual machine. This is the server that we are going to deploy and where we are going to map the ISO that we generate. We will deploy this virtual machine that is consuming the ISO that has been generated. From where is coming this ISO? If we go to the Artifactory server that is here running, this is our Artifactory server, the repo, where we open this link, you will get here. And what we have done is we have a day 2 operation where you click on patch image and you give here the URL of your ISO. This is the ISO that you download directly from SUSE website. You don't need to give any custom ISO. It's just the ISO directly from the SUSE website. When you run this command, that ISO get uploaded here on the current ISOs with that modification that we mentioned before. And the modification I will show you very quickly on the code. Let's open this specific blueprint. That is this one. Let's find the VM. And this is the control VM that is Artifactory. As a part of the patching process, that is this task, let's see how it looks like the script. I'm going to zoom in to make it clear. And you can see that the only things that we do, this is shell script. We are just downloading the image, the native or the original image. Then we mount the image on that Linux machine, and we change, including the auto installation. And we point here that auto just need to go to that Artifactory server to download the binaries. Once that has been changed, then we generate a new ISO, right? We can see here the command, let's generate a new ISO with that change, and we upload that ISO into Artifactory. This blueprint is available on a GitHub repo. You will find it on the description as well, and you can use the blueprint and give it a go. Again, this approach can be for virtual machines as well as physical servers. So the way that this help from physical servers standpoint, having this modified ISO, is that you don't need PXE or TFTP on your network. You will need at least DHCP, so that server can get an IP address and reach out to the Artifactory server. We are using here Artifactory as an example, but could be any other web server that you may have already available on your environment. Let's move very quickly to deploying one of those SUSE Linux. Let's go to the previous blueprint. And when we click here, launch, let's discard those changes. We are going to give a name, okay? And this is going to be demo SUSE Linux Enterprise, and we need to give here the URI. We can get that from Artifactory, and this is the one that we need. So this is now when we have already image generated, it's ready to use, and this is a completely empty virtual machine that has only one hard disk, plus the ISO that is going to be mounted. We click just deploy, and we will see in a few seconds the creation of this virtual machine and how it start the provisioning from that ISO. Let's move to the audit tab to see the deployment process. And the first thing that COM will try is to pull the image or fetch the image from that repo and then mount the image into the virtual machine. The entire process to get a SUSE Linux available is about 10 minutes. What is the benefit of this approach? I have been testing, as you could see, SUSE Linux 12 SP3, but testing new images, it's really, really quickly, because the only thing that you need is the new ISO URL, add this ISO on the previous process to generate that ISO that we are creating with the changes for AutoJust, and then you are ready to go. So you can imagine if you need to do this with multiple clicks several times, every time that there is a new ISO, at the end that takes a lot of time. every time that you have new versions, patches, or you need to refresh your template. On this way, you are automating this process. So the virtual machine is being created. Let's open that virtual machine. We should have here the virtual machine coming up. Let's open very quickly the console. Let's see how it's going, that process. And we should see that the SUSE Linux image, it's being boot. We can see here that is booting from that ISO. We will see now the connection that start to download the binaries from that Artifactory. Again, remember that in this case it's Artifactory, you can use other repo. And at some point we'll stop because we need to provide the AutoJust. It's stopping because we don't have an AutoJust configuration file there because we want to show that process. But if there is a configuration file already in the repo, then that will go, the process will continue and won't stop there. What do you think about this automation, Bas? What is your opinion? How that helps?
I think it's very good because it solves some of the problems that we previously had. We tried to get to a point where we could do an automated setup of SUSE Linux. The problem there was that, for example, with the versions that you can download that are not OpenSUSE or OpenSUSE Leap, something like that, these images rely on either an AutoJust infrastructure or something similar. You would need to do a Pixie boot, something like that, for a completely fresh setup. Obviously, you can use VM images. The problem is that maintaining images of an installed VM can be somewhat cumbersome. We want fresh installations and we want those to work and behave the same time every way. The same way every time. Sorry, I got my words mixed up. But that's, in my opinion, a better solution than having to deploy an image and create multiple virtual machine images for every configuration that you want. And this is a very good approach because we don't rely on images where we have Cloud Init enabled or anything like that. We just mount a CD image and we're off to the races. So for me, this really solves an issue that we were having that we had to work around.
That sounds great. And the purpose as well, right, from my side was about how we can converge physical with virtual, right, and have a single operating model to do that bootstrapping installation, that it's the same for both worlds and you don't need to maintain both of them. So I'm going to hand over very quickly to Bas to cover the next part, but this is what we were talking before. Right now, this has stopped because there is not a configuration file. The only thing that you will have to do is we get this file, we save the AutoJust configuration file, default. Let's replace the previous one that I have. Then we go to JFrog. We need to get authenticated. Let's do this very quickly. And then we just upload that image here on the profiles. We click on deploy, select the file that is the default file that we have, that XML, and we give the path default in this case. We deploy, we go back to the console, and if we hit retry, that just go through the configuration process and installation process. So this is what we have for the first part of the demo. That was the automation of SUSE Linux on Nutanix Con. Let's hand over to Bas.
Okay, thanks, Jose. So what I am going to do, you can see my desktop at the moment. I'm going to log on onto our Prism Central instance. Now, this is our environment that is in use inside of SAP. We partner with SAP. We have several Nutanix clusters inside of SAP's environment. And as you can see, we use our own tools there, obviously. This is just 3 clusters as an example, although we do have a couple of more that we use for testing. I'm going to click on the menu, select COM, and after it initializes, I don't have quite a fancy App Store setup like Jose has in his environment, but this is development after all. You can see that we have 1 application deployed, and as in any good cooking show, this is something that you can see I've prepared 3 hours ago, but we're going to deploy the exact same thing just once more so that you can see what I'm going to connect in later on. Now, you will find a couple of blueprints, one that I use for active development, but this is the one that we're going to be using, /12 blueprint template. Now, in our scenario, we have created a virtual machine, relatively simple. We give it a temporary name. It has a certain amount of CPUs and cores. We have a disk image that we're going to boot from in this case, because this predates what Jose has created. I'm actually looking really forward to implementing Jose's solution so that we can build more on top of that. Here we have a very minimally installed image that we log into. We have a profile that we attach to the virtual machine, and I'm just going to change to a different cluster for deployment. As you can see here, I can select a network card. The top one is Nutanix Cluster 2. I'm just going to deploy this against Nutanix Cluster 4. We have some presets. And when all of this is done, I click Save, and I should be able to launch this by clicking the Launch button, obviously. I'm going to give this a name, Baz Raymond SAP, and I'm going to use a SID of BR1. For those that don't know, SID is an SAP system identifier, which is a combination of 3 letters and or numbers. I'm going to leave all the default values in place. I can select how many VMs I want to deploy, and then I can set some advanced flags, because SAP has relatively strict requirements on how a VM can be configured and how flexible you are. Those differ between, for example, a system that is used in production and will be different for something that you use for example, development or sandboxing. So we can just select what we want to mimic for our work. So should a vCPU be hard pin? Do we need CPU pass-through? The number of disks that we leverage. For example, we can say we're going to use 6 virtual disks that will back data and 6 that will back the log volume for the database, so that we can even test different versions of best practices, because as our software evolves, some of these things might change. And especially in our role in engineering, we want to ensure that we're relatively flexible in the combinations that we can test. For SUSE, we can, in this case for /12, select which service pack level we want to install. So for example, 4 or 5, we could add others on demand. And in this case, I have my Prism Central instance that I'm going to connect to, because we're going to be using some API calls in the background. Now here I have credentials that have been pre-provided, but I can overwrite them if need be. I can say how many cores I want and how many sockets virtual I want to use. And you will see that I have a memory size that I can configure. Now, what you might be missing is disk sizes. And for example, the logic for the disk sizes are dictated by SAP. It will be dependent on the amount of memory that is configured for the virtual machine. So if I add more memory, the sizes for my disks actually increase. And all of that is being done in the background automatically. Here I can enter my SID. And if I then click on deploy, it starts the blueprint, similar to what Jose has shown before. I can go to the audit log, and it'll start relatively simply by provisioning a virtual machine. And if I just skip some of these steps, I can open this up just to show you that it's doing something. Provision Nutanix. Here we can see, if I maximize this window, maybe zoom in a bit, that we're deploying a virtual machine. You can see the OS type and so on. Now, this will take a tiny bit of time, so I'm just going to switch to the instance that was already provisioned. But in here, if I go to the audit log for the create, we will see that it has deployed the virtual machine. It checks if it can log in. And then in the next steps, it'll perform all of the operations that I've defined in the blueprint. For example, in this specific scenario, we rely on a function inside of Nutanix AHV hypervisor, which is called IPAM. So with the network, we can set up a virtual DHCP server. I've reserved about 200 host names in DNS. And I don't want to really care about which host name the virtual machine is getting. So the virtual machine has a temporary host name. We then look what IP address the virtual machine gets and simply do a network lookup for the host name in DNS. And we then set the host name on the virtual machine. And we even do the same thing inside of Nutanix Prism console. So if I want to look up the virtual machine in the future, I can just search for COMVM234 instead of having to remember a cryptic name. We then configure NTP, things like AutoMounter, an update proxy, enable SSH, for example, for keyword password login to allow that, and do some other operations. We also update the VM configuration so that all of the disks are attached and so on, and then make sure that everything is ready to install SAP as an application. Now, if I go to this finished machine, you will see that I have various actions that I can perform here. One of the things that I am going to do now is click on the play button for Install HANA. I select the database version that I want to use. So in our case, we're going to be installing SAP HANA version 2 and minor version 41. I click on Run. It'll start the action. And on the right side, you will see that we create a substrate. And we start installing everything that we needed, including packages. And if I open this up, you will see that it detected the SAP HANA database. We do an unattended setup. We install all packages required. And SAP's installation is a bit longer. It'll take about 10 to 15 minutes. But the good thing is, once this is running, I have a completely standardized and configured SAP HANA database system. Now, that obviously is useful, but in our environment, we don't just need SAP HANA to be installed. We have various benchmarks, like, for example, HCOT. That is a benchmarking tool from SAP that customers can also run to validate against SAP that the SAP HANA installation meets all of the storage performance requirements in case they open a support case, because SAP wants to ensure that there's no conflicts, etc. So we can run things like HCOT automatically. It's just an additional click. We can grab cluster configuration inventories, or we can run other validation tools like PB offline. And in our case, we even go a bit further. We have added some GitHub integration. And if I switch to GitHub and go to, for example, the PB offline directory, you will see that at the end of our validation work, everything is uploaded in the various directories, time-stamped. We can go in there and we get direct access to the output of the validation run. We can compare results. We have saved the configuration of the environment of the virtual machine, which means that it's essentially 3-4 clicks to go through this automation and compare results. Now, obviously, we fine-tune the blueprints and so on, but this makes it very traceable, makes it very easy to also deliver all of the results that we need to SAP and to our partners when we do our validation work. So it provides us an incredible amount of flexibility. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of this will need to be customized for a customer environment. So if you want to do something similar, most customers don't actually go through the validation. But this is just a showcase of what the tool can do. Same thing, the installation of SAP HANA is just an example, but this could be expanded upon, for example, to install entire SAP stacks with a bit of customization. And obviously, we can help with, for example, our services department that has incredible people where we can help you make this fit like a glove, essentially. But that is just the overview of what we've been doing in the engineering team with regards to SAP HANA and our validation work, and how we use COM automation to enable all of this and make our own lives a lot easier. And as stated before, I'm really looking forward to building up on Jose's work, because he's done an incredible job. And that way I can finally get rid of that VM image and just do an installation from the ISO image, which should make this even more flexible than it already is.
That sounds great, Bas, the work that you have done here on the team. I have a few questions for you. The first one, if you would have to quantify how much time you are saving now versus before, because I can see that this could be in the past too many clicks and looking for the different files that you need to do the installation, as you saw, as well as the different day two operations that you have there for validation. I'm pretty sure that they were a multi-step process for each of them in the past. If you could have to quantify.
So the benchmark itself, that can run for multiple hours, sometimes even for multiple days. So that's something that we cannot really shorten. But all of the steps leading up to that usually took us somewhere between 1 to 2 days, depending on if we had installed that before, if some of the settings changed, etc. Right now, it's essentially a matter of less than 15 minutes, because we deploy the blueprint, we select how many VMs we want or need, and then we just start the action that we need to validate, and we can walk away and we just pick up the results the next day. The good thing there is that it's standardized, so it looks the same for everyone. There's not a chance of a colleague saying, oh, I forgot this flag because I didn't have my morning coffee. And the other thing is it makes it comparable. It doesn't matter who this does. Any of the team members can just click on the buttons, deploy this, and get back, and the results will be there, and everything is in a similar format. And I just spotted that the installation's finished. So this took between 4:09 p.m. and 4:14 p.m., 5 minutes to install SAP HANA. And let me just double check, because if I now go to services, oops, I'm looking in the wrong place, I think. Go to Open Terminal. I should be able to log on and show that we have a working SAP HANA database. Oops. ER180M. I do SAP control, the instance number for the SAP database, and then do a get process list to actually, oops, get process. And if I don't put in any typos, that is better. And we can see that we have an SAP HANA database up and running. All the services are started in green. So quite simple to do.
That is amazing. So my second question before we wrap up, a customer with the support, for example, from Nutanix services as well as partner services, they could get something like this and have it on the marketplace that we saw before, right? And they could be just as a consumption, like I need a SAP HANA, and they could click there and get it.
Yes. So what I want to do, and we're just lacking time, but I want to make at least the SAP HANA installation something publicly available. Probably in the first step, just on my own GitHub. Maybe we can get this officially into the to the Nutanix marketplace. But you would need to provide, obviously, the installation sources for SAP HANA, but the rest should be a relatively automatic process, just a single blueprint that you can get from the marketplace. Or at least that is my desire. That's what we would want to strive for.
Exactly. And embrace the community to collaborate and to improve this automation.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many good ideas out there from customers, from partners, from fellow geeks. So if you have thoughts on what we can do to improve, and if you want to join that initiative and provide back to the community, I look forward to seeing what we can all do together.
That's great, Bas. We hope that you enjoyed the more automation, less click session today with Bas and your host, Jose. That was a really great demo from Bas. Bas, any last words to the people that they are watching this session?
First of all, to you, thank you for showing what you've done, because I really enjoyed that. I think that's extremely valuable. To the people out there, it's a good chance to work with automation. Try and take that chance. I know that you're busy just doing your day-to-day job, but if you take a bit of time and really invest in that, there's a good way to make your life a lot easier by using tools like this.
Thank you, Bas. If you want to try what you have seen today on this session, check Test Drive. With Nutanix Test Drive, you can test the Nutanix Hyperconverged platform, but also Khan for automation as well as other products. Enjoy the SUSE conference. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.